at the United States Embassy in Kiev, and it was a woman named Joanna Wintroll. And then he looked at journalists and said, maybe she is worth talking to.
Name drop.
Yeah.
Now, before we finish what the general said, we just want to hit you with a quick knowledge nugget. So this Wintroll lady left Kiev in August of 2020. Now, something that is odd is that in an interview that she did before she left, she had stated that no United States scientists worked in Ukrainian biolabs and accused Russia of spreading false information. We just thought that was a good knowledge nugget.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In August of 2020, she was saying that. It's like, what? Did she time travel or something?
Must have.
Yeah.
But yeah, let's hop back to what the general was saying.
All right, so following that name drop, General Igor stated that in 2021, the Kharkov Institute of Veterinarian Medicine in Ukraine was studying wild birds as transmission vectors and actually assessing conditions under which the spread could cause economic damage and food insecurity. The general then stated that they had acquired evidence that showed the institute in Ukraine had collected strains of avian flu that was capable of jumping species. He then went on to say that this institute may have been the cause of the 2021 mass outbreaks of the avian flu in Russia and the EU that ended up causing billions in damages, and actually called for an investigation into this matter.
The general then went on to point out many other coincidences of documents of illegal virus research that was being done in Ukraine that they had come across and connecting them with the dates and outbreaks of certain viruses. The Russian general then brought up the long history of the United States conducting banned biological research in other countries, noting as an example that in 2010, the United States apologized for syphilis experiments in Guatemala. Ew.
Yeah, I think we covered that in our human experimentation episode.
I think so.
All of the stuff that the United States had done. All right. So the general went and said, okay, yeah, you don't think we got any documents to prove all this? He went and laid it all out. So the very next day, after that news conference, you know when Russia requested a meeting with the UN Security Council over what they had found?
Yeah.
Well, finally, the UN Security Council actually held a meeting to discuss this United States alleged military biological research that was being done in Ukraine, supposedly. Now, China sent some representatives there, and Russia had some people there. You know, everybody kind of got together to hear this tea, you know? So China's representative stated in front of the UN Security Council that Russia's revelations of documents pertaining to the US-backed biological laboratories in Ukraine deserves the world's attention, and the parties involved in it need to address those concerns.
Russia then shared the evidence that it had obtained from the laboratories across Ukraine with the UN Security Council. Russia's representative then made a statement to the Security Council and said that if the dangerous pathogens had gotten out of the labs, the scale of impact, including among the population of European countries, in this case is even difficult to imagine. It is possible that even the coronavirus epidemic could pale in comparison.
So after those statements, the UN Security Council looked over the documents, and then after a little short while, the UN Security Council High Representative for Disarmament Affairs, Izumi Nakamatsu, which I'm sure I pronounced his name wrong, he actually came up and made a statement. He said that the UN Security Council has neither the authority nor the ability to verify the data provided by Russia on the alleged U.S. military biological programs in Ukraine.
And that is it. That is where we are currently at with this situation and the Ukrainian biolabs. However, this story doesn't stop here because we decided to do some digging and we came across some crazy stuff that we are now going to get into with strange facts and findings. So, Aaron, do you want to start it off for us and tell us about our first strange fact and finding?
Absolutely. Okay, so our first strange fact and finding is about the Lugar Center in Georgia, which we're referring to the country, not the state in the United States, okay? Georgia, the country, okay? So in 2018, the Russian government started to claim that this center in Georgia was running a biological weapons lab. Now, one of the projects that this center was working on was called Project Insect Allies, which they would use flying insects to carry modified viruses that would usually harm plants to change the DNA of them to make them more resistant against the weather and other pests as well. Now, this was for when food supply was starting to be affected by some outside force, but the Russian government got a hold of this information and brought up the dual use of using the insects as pretty much a biological weapon, which I can see how they can be used for good. And
the U.S. stated that it is not developing biological weapons in the center in Georgia, but that this human and veterinarian public health facility was owned and operated by Georgian National Center for Disease Control and Public Health, not the United States. But the Russian government claimed the documents released by former Georgian State Security Minister Igor Giorgadze, pretty sure I said that last name wrong, shows the facility was funded entirely by the U.S. and that the Georgian ownership was a cover-up on paper.
so the Russian government did try to blame the United States for some viruses being spread through the part of Russia through insects, such as the African swine flu from Georgia. Since 2007, it has caused massive losses for the Russian farm sector, carrying Crimea-Congo hemorrhagic fever, which is a deadly viral disease. And just to clarify, though, that the Lugar Center is a frequent target of Russian disinformation. Is that true, though?
They supposedly attack them a lot, saying like, y'all are doing this, y'all are doing that, because it is like close to the border. So, yeah, I don't know.
At this point, I mean, I don't know who to believe. There's so much shit out here. It's crazy, you know?
It is.
They're purposely playing each other just to watch this, you know, us be like, oh, what's going on? Anyway.
But to keep adding to some interesting stuff for this center in Georgia, we found a couple images of some documents. So, 17 kilometers away is the Vaziani military airbase. And this image we have, the first one we have, shows the DoD requirements for contractors under DTRA program that security clearances are only given to those who are U.S. citizens into the center in Georgia.
So it pretty much proves that
you have to be a U.S. citizen to get and have appropriate security clearance to get into certain parts of this lab.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So what's this next document?
And this next document is an agreement between the government of the United States of America and the government of Georgia on defense cooperation, which, if you look, it is signed by the United States and the government of Georgia as well, which, if you read carefully in the middle, it says United States military and civilian personnel shall be accorded privileges and immunities equivalent to those provided to administrative and technical staff of the embassy under the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations concluded on April 18, 1961. Which means that all the U.S. citizens or anybody that's going into the lab and all that stuff, if they get in trouble, they have diplomatic immunity. It's kind of...
Okay, so they get their ass covered.
Yeah.
All right.
So it's kind of odd.
Yeah, it is. All right, so let's go on to our next strange fact and finding, which is about the biolab at Fort Detrick. So in 2019, the CDC stripped the base of its license to handle highly restricted, quote-unquote, select agents, which includes Ebola, smallpox, and anthrax. Now, the reason the CDC stripped the base of its license was because of an inspection done by them at, of course, Fort Detrick Army Lab. and they found multiple problems with new procedures used to decontaminate wastewater.
Which, if nobody knows where Fort Detrick is, it's in Maryland. Just an FYI. Little knowledge nugget. Now, the CDC inspectors found that new procedures were not sufficient, with both mechanical failures causing leaks and researchers failing to properly follow the rules. They received a cease and desist order to suspend all research, which would last several months, which this isn't the first time something like this has happened at Fort Detrick though. Like in 2009, research at Fort Detrick had been suspended because it had pathogens that were not listed in their inventory. So they had some nasty stuff that they didn't mention in their reports.
Makes you wonder.
It's like, oh God, we have Ebola over here, but we don't want to list that. Oh.
Yeah. You figured they'd have to, make sure that all that shit's up to date, which I guess they don't really care.
No.
I know all of radioactive sources have to be tracked. Well, certain ones,
Yeah.
And if you don't have them tracked, it's a big deal. Anyways, so Dan, you want to start this next one off for us?
I do. I found this to be interesting.
Okay. Extraterrestrial.
Yeah. So those missions to Mars or other planets where, they are supposedly bringing back samples to Earth.
Okay, yeah.
Well, like Mars, they have it listed as a Category 5, which means they are stating that this planet is deemed by scientific opinion to be of significant interest to the process of a chemical evolution or the origin of life. With that being stated, they need a facility that can provide the safety level to handle such samples arriving from there.
So they're stating that samples arriving from the planet Mars, they have to go into a BSL 5, pretty much?
Technically, that's what it sounds like, is that these BSL 4s are not capable, the current ones.
Okay, yeah, because, the BSL 4 facilities actually don't provide the level of cleanliness currently to handle such samples from Mars when they do arrive. Now, the facility that takes these samples must be able to handle and contain unknown biohazards, as the sizes of any alien microorganisms are still pretty much unknown, right?
Yeah.
So they want a filter system to filter all the way down to 10 nanometers, which most viruses are no smaller than 20 nanometers. But the filter system must not let anything bigger escape by any means, because it could possibly be catastrophic. You have this rock come from Mars that has this alien reproducing, replicating virus that's 10 nanometers, right? And all of a sudden it starts eating everything, and it turns into this black goo, and then it starts multiplying bigger and bigger, and you got this giant goo coming at you, and everybody's like, don't let the goo get you. That's just one example off the top of my head.
Yeah. What was that movie with Keanu Reeves where the thing just started destroying everything?
John Wick?
No, he's destroying everything.
Matrix?
He's like a spokesman for the aliens or something like that.
Bill and Ted?
No. Damn, what is that movie called?
Day the Earth Stood Still?
Yeah, that one.
Okay. Just going down the list.
But yeah, I guess I haven't watched that movie fully, but I think the alien thing or whatever, the statue broke down and started destroying stuff. It was very small particles.
All right, so in regards to these samples coming from Mars, have they actually had any arrive yet?
No.
Oh.
Not yet.
Okay.
NASA is working with the ESA, which is the European Space Agency, on the Mars sample return campaign. These samples should arrive in the early 2030s. So they will need a sample receiving facility to be able to handle the extraterrestrial samples, is what they're calling them. No clear plans have been made about building this facility yet, since they are still looking at designs which they think could take 7 to 10 years at minimum. So the sample receiving facility that they need, like you said, it's going to have to be a BSL level 5. They're going to make a new one for it.
So they're saying it could take 7 to 10 years. Samples should arrive in the early 2030s. They better hurry their ass up.
Exactly.
They're right on the minimum deadline. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I can see it now. Coronavirus goes away. World War III happens. It finally ends in 2030. And then all of a sudden we get these samples that come back from Mars, and it creates an entire other shitstorm.
And this is the